Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 179 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, try as we might to make great photographs all the time, uh, and notwithstanding that stat that I shared in a previous episode that 80% of the people in the world who take photographs think that they are excellent photographers. But try as we might, we don't always make the photographs that are really good, the ones that we really want to make. And I'm not alone in this. I know. I mean, I'm not the only one who finds a photograph in my archive that I am disappointed didn't work somehow. Didn't work somehow. And I find those kinds of experiences of looking at things that didn't quite work out and figuring out how to embrace that failure, how to embrace the almost good photographs. Obviously, I'm not talking here about the pictures where you accidentally press the shutter release while the camera's not pointed at anything, and you get a picture of your foot or the inside of your camera bag. I'm talking about photographs where you actually had some intentionality of making an interesting photograph of a subject that you found fascinating, and yet somehow it just didn't work out. So I like to go through my archives from time to time and look for those photographs that are almost good. Now, you're sort of saying to yourself, well, what in the world would you do that for? I mean, why wouldn't you just look for the successes? Because I think we can learn from our failures. I think we can learn from those pictures that are almost good. We can embrace that almost and see if we can learn a little bit more about what it is that caused us to react to the subject in the first place and what it is that didn't quite make it into the photograph. And I'm going to include a few pictures on the cameraposition.com blog, and I'll include these in the PDF too that comes along with the app. So that you can kind of look at these pictures that I'm just not happy with, that just didn't work for some reason. And I'll sort of go through them briefly here. I mean, I know that it's an audio podcast and you're going to have to look at the visuals, but I'll describe them a little bit. So one is a look through an archway in a small town in Italy. And, I suppose I was intrigued by the light coming through the archway. I was intrigued by the sort of ancient quality of the archway. But in the end, there wasn't anything that really grabs our attention about this picture. It wouldn't have mattered whether I moved left, right, up, down, whether I included more of the archway, whether I included less of the archway. The light is boring. There's nothing really exciting happening about the light. There's nothing happening about the scene. And what I remember about this particular set of circumstances is that I remember taking the picture and thinking, well, that's not much of anything, and then kind of stalking around and seeing if I can find something else, not making any additional pictures and kind of hoping that maybe something would happen. The sun would come out, or someone would walk through, or a bird would fly, or some other aspect would change, and really nothing happened. We'll move on to another one here where, I know that I was really intrigued by the sort of peeling paint of this doorway, peeling paint, aged paint, blue, red, some faded color, and that there was some sense of a time gone by. And yet, no matter how much I did in post-production, I couldn't make the colors look the way I wanted them to look, the sort of kind of sadness of the colors being formerly there but no longer there, and the fact that maybe this door had been painted a beautiful blue, or this archway had been painted a beautiful blue or a beautiful red, and this little rosette had been painted some interesting colors. Somehow there wasn't enough of the color there. And then this last one, and this one is, man, this is one of these ones where I remember making this photograph. I remember making this photograph of this doorway arch with a peeling paint blue door. And I look at it now and I realize, man, Jeff, you should have just made a decision. Is the picture about the doorway arch, of which there is not really enough, and it's not placed in the frame in a very interesting way? Or is it about the blue door, which is not enough of that either? So, should I have moved in closer to the blue door? Should I have paid more attention to the interesting architectural details that have been carved into the doorway? Maybe one or the other or both. So, what did I learn from this? Well, what I learned was that, you know, and I remember, way back when, some of you may remember Fred Picker. We'll talk maybe at some point about Fred Picker, a really interesting photographer, an interesting guy. He did something that was akin to the podcasting of his day, and that he produced this great opinionated kind of curmudgeonly newsletter about photography. And I'll probably go back and talk about him at some later time in Camera Position. But I remember seeing a video about Fred Picker once, and he's photographing and he's walking by a door, and he says, well, here's the doorway to a barn, and I've photographed in this situation like this before, and I know that there's not a good photograph there, so I'm just going to walk by. And I've always thought about that, and I've always thought about the fact that, you shouldn't ever tell a photographer that there's not a subject there. Let the photographer learn where there's a subject, what's interesting to that photographer, and what it is that they might be able to find in that set of circumstances. So what did I learn from these three pictures of these archways or doorways? I think one of the things that I learned is that one of the things that I need to get myself really moving in photography is light. I need the interplay of light and shadow, and in that first arched doorway picture, I was compelled to take the picture because the archway was interesting, but the light wasn't there. And while I have the picture and I can remember that, what I can remember is next time I'm in a situation like that, look for interesting light and look for that contrast of light versus dark or shadow, something happening that creates a visual excitement by virtue of light. What did I learn about the blue paint in these two pictures? Well, I love the color blue. It's one of my favorite colors. And what I really wish I had was a closer image of both of these places where there was blue paint on the doorway. Rather than making a record of these two places, I wished I'd been a little bit more interpretive about looking at the door itself in that third image I described, or looking at just the intersection of the red and the blue, cropping in the camera so that what I got was a more abstract version of that paint, and kind of looked at it in a different way. These are pictures I don't have. These are pictures that perhaps in a similar situation in a future time, I'll look at a little bit more carefully, because I've embraced that almost. These are pictures that didn't quite work. Why didn't they work for me? They didn't work because I didn't devote enough time to thinking about what it was that genuinely interested me about the subject that I chose to photograph. So in the future, I'll be a little bit more careful and think through what it is that really drew me to those subjects and what it is that I really want to do with them. So in the next episode of Camera Position, I'm going to take a look at a couple of other tools that we have at our disposal that might help us look for ways that we can see a little bit more clearly, a little bit more easily into the subjects that we're looking at and how we're photographing them, and see if we can analyze some data more than some just personal responses. So I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.